students, so we have already completed the first part, which is the unit 1. Now we are moving on to the plant physiology. Now I have heard students telling me that the plant physiology part is a bit boring, but the thing is कि plant physiology boring नहीं, उन लोगों का बस concept clear नहीं होता. पर अगर आपका कॉन्सेप्ट क्लियर है प्लांट फिजियोलॉजी को लेके तो आपको कोई नहीं रोक सकता कि आप सारे क्वेश्चंस का आंसर ठीक से, ठीक है ना. तो लेट अस मूव ऑन विद द फर्स्ट चैप्टर ऑफ प्लांट फिजियोलॉजी व्हिच इज एब्जॉर्प्शन बाय रूट्स. नाउ एब्जॉर्प्शन बाय रूट्स समझने के लिए सबसे पहले हमें जानना पड़ेगा कि व्हाई डू प्लांट्स नीड वाटर एंड मिनरल्स, राइट. Now the first point is photosynthesis. Now photosynthesis का basic आप सबको पता है that photosynthesis is the preparation of food by the leaves of the plant or the synthesis of the glucose. Now for photosynthesis we need raw materials like water and minerals. Next comes transpiration. Transpiration is the evaporation of water from the leaves, right? Now for that evaporation we need adequate amount of water, and that adequate amount of water will only be present if only the roots are properly absorbing the water, right? Next comes the transportation. Transportation तो बहुत ही ज़रूरी होता है plants के लिए क्योंकि we know that the food is prepared in the leaves only. Now how does the other parts receive the food? With the help of water, right? So for that the roots play an important role. Next comes the mechanical stiffness. For mechanical stiffness we do need water, otherwise the plant may dry up. We all know that, right? So for that roots have developed few important features or characteristics so that they can easily absorb a good amount of water and minerals. First feature being enormous surface area. Now roots cover large areas, right? How? Because they have root hairs. Now the huge amount of root hairs makes up enormous space for the absorption by the roots, and greater surface area is always equal to better absorption. Now let us move on to the highly concentrated sap that is present within the root hairs and the roots, right? Now what happens is that due to that high concentration inside the cell, the water molecules present all around those root area rushes in to equalize the concentration. Now about this concept of the concentrations we will discuss it later on in the chapter, right? Now let us move on with the thin walls. Now we all know that thin walls equal to greater conduction, that is greater absorption, ठीक है. Now what are those processes which are involved in the absorption and conduction of the water and minerals? Those being imbibition, diffusion, osmosis, active transport and turgidity and facility. Okay. Now what is imbibition? Imbibition is the absorption of the water by the cells through surface attraction. Now what is surface attraction? Now suppose जो sponge होता है ना, जब भी हम उसे पानी के पास रखते हैं तो it absorbs all the water, कुछ उसी तरीके से काम करता है ये. तो the cells which performs the imbibition are hydrophilic in nature, ठीक है. Hydrophilic. Now what is hydrophilic? Hydrophilic is the strong affinity towards water. जैसे कि पानी देखो तो वो दौड़ के चला जाता है, ठीक है ना. Now what imbibition does is that when the water is absorbed through this imbibition, the pressure exerted by the water present inside the seed sometimes helps the seed core to rupture. That is, the dry seeds become water contented and ruptures the seed coat. Okay. Now let us move on to diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion is the movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration when kept in direct contact. Okay. Suppose in case of cell wall, since it is freely permeable, the water and minerals can easily enter through diffusion, that is from the region of higher concentration to lower concentration. Okay. Now let us move on to a bit complicated version of diffusion, which is osmosis. Now what happens is osmosis is that there is a presence of semi-permeable membrane. Okay. Now due to this semi-permeable membrane, which allows only selective substances to pass through it, only water molecules can pass through it. So what happens in osmosis is that water molecules from dilute solution, that is its region of higher concentration, to a concentrated solution, which is the less concentrated solution of water. Right? Now I know it is a bit confusing. So for that, let us first understand the concept of tonicity. Okay. Now what is tonicity? The tonicity is the relative concentration of two solutions. There are three types, which are hypertonic, hypotonic and isotonic. Right? Now what is hypertonic? Hypertonic means that the concentration of solute in a solution is higher than that of the solvent. Okay. Now hypotonic में क्या होता है? In hypotonic, the concentration of solute is less than the concentration of solvent, and in isotonic, the concentration of solute is equal to the concentration of solvent. Okay. Now let us move back to this osmosis. Now what happens is that the water molecules moves from hypotonic solution, which has less solute but more solvent, which is water, to the hypertonic solution, which has more solute and less water. Got it? Right? Hypotonic to hypertonic. Remember, it's only the movement of the water molecule, since there is a presence of semi-permeable membrane. Okay, got it. I hope you have no confusion anymore. Okay. Now, osmosis are of two types, right? Which is endosmosis and exosmosis. अब नाम से ही पता चल रहा है कि endosmosis means that the entry of the water molecules inside the cell, and exosmosis means that the movement of the water molecules from inside of the cell to the outside environment. Okay. Now let us understand osmosis more clearly with the help of an experiment. Okay. Now what we can see here is that a beaker which contains water and the thistle funnel which contains concentrated sugar solution dipped in that water, and that thistle funnel, the mouth of the thistle funnel is covered with a semi-permeable membrane, suppose egg membrane. Okay. Now that one is the experimental setup. We will take another setup which does not have the sugar solution in this thistle funnel, rather it will contain water, and that another setup will be known as control setup. Okay. Now what happens in this experiment is that after few hours we will notice that the level of this sugar solution or the level of this solution has increased from here to suppose here. But in the control setup, the level of the solution inside the thistle funnel will not increase. But why? Obviously, osmosis. Since this thistle funnel has the sugar solution in it, which is the hypotonic solution, and sorry, my mistake. Since the sugar solution is hypertonic in nature and the water is obviously hypotonic, the water rushes inside the thistle funnel through this cell membrane by osmosis. Since osmosis means the movement of the water molecules from hypotonic to hypertonic solution. That is why the level of the solution in the thistle funnel increases. But since in control setup there is no sugar solution in the thistle funnel and only water, the level of the solution inside the thistle funnel of the control setup remains the same. I hope you have understood clearly. कोई confusion नहीं रहा, ठीक है? Now एक चीज़ है, that is osmotic pressure. Now what is osmotic pressure? Osmotic pressure is the measure of the tendency to take in water through osmosis. Okay. Now for how long does this osmosis continue? It continues until both the solutions, that is outside the cell and inside the cell, just become equal. That is, it attains the stage of equilibrium. Okay. Now let's just move on to active transport. Now what happens in active transport is that substances move from the region of lower concentration to that of higher concentration, okay, which is exactly the opposite of diffusion. Now how does that occur? That happens with the help of ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate, that ultimately provides energy to push the substances from lower concentration to higher concentration, right? Now since we know that the cell membrane is a semi-permeable membrane and it only allows selective substances to pass through it, that is only the water molecules. So what happens to the minerals? How does the plant take up the minerals, right? So what happens to the minerals is that the minerals are taken up by the roots by this active transport only, and those minerals move through the cell wall. Got it? Now let us get familiar with two terms, that is turgidity and flaccidity. Okay. Now what is turgidity? Turgidity is the condition when cell cannot accommodate any more water. That is, the cell is completely filled with water, it cannot take any more water, right? That is called a turgid cell, and that condition is turgidity. Okay. Now flaccidity क्या होता है? Flaccidity is exactly the opposite of turgidity. That is when there is not enough cytoplasm, or that is due to the less water, the cell's condition is known as flaccidity. Okay, or it is called a flaccid cell. टर्जिडिटी के लिए क्या होता है? जब सेल टर्जिड हो जाता है ना, उसका साइटोप्लाज्म exerts pressure on the cell wall, and that pressure is known as turgid pressure. That is, the pressure due to turgidity is turgid pressure. And what is wall pressure? It is exactly the opposite. The pressure that is exerted by the wall on the cell cytoplasm is known as the wall pressure. Now due to this turgidity and flaccidity, दो चीज़ें होती है, वो है plasmolysis and deplasmolysis. Okay. Now what is plasmolysis? Plasmolysis is the shrinkage of cytoplasm from the cell wall due to the absence of water. Okay. As you can see here, this is a normal cell with proper cytoplasm from the cell wall due to the absence of water. Okay, as you can see here, this is a normal cell with proper cytoplasm, vacuole and nucleus. But when there is a shortage of water, or if there is a hypertonic solution outside the cell, the water from inside the cell where there is a hypotonic condition, it rushes outside in order to equalize the solution. उसकी वजह से क्या होता है? The cytoplasm get shrunk, and this condition is known as plasmolysis. Got it? Now what is deplasmolysis? Deplasmolysis is exactly the opposite of plasmolysis. When this plasmolysed cell is again placed in a hypotonic solution, the water from the hypotonic solutions rushes inside the cell, which then had a hypertonic solution inside it, in order to equalize the solution. Got it? Now let us move on with the uses of turgidity. That is, what happens due to the turgidity. Now turgidity provides rigidity to the softer cells. Obviously, if the cell is turgid, then it will create the turgor pressure, which ultimately will give rigidity to the cells. Next, it helps in the germinating seeds to push the seedling through the hard ground, right? If there is a strong turgor pressure, the seedling can easily break through the hard ground and can grow into a new plant. Now, you have already read in class 9 about the stomatal cells. Now, this turgidity also helps in the opening and closing of the stomatal guard cell. Now, what happens is that when the guard cells are turgid, it opens, okay, and when the guard cells are not turgid, that is, it becomes flaccid, the stomatal guard cells closes. Got it? Next, we move on to the turgid movement. Now we have seen that on touching few plants, or if there is a stimulus on some plant, the plant seems to move. Suppose example, Mimosa pudica. What happens there when we touch the leaves of the Mimosa pudica? It seems to move itself away from the stimulus, right? That is due to the turgid pressure or the turgidity. Similarly, that is the case in case of the plant named Venus flytrap, which engulfs insects when those insects sit on the leaves of that plant. Got it? Now, there is a very important function of this turgidity, is that it creates root pressure. Now, what is root pressure? Root pressure is the pressure that occurs due to the continuous cell-to-cell endosmosis and exosmosis of water, which ultimately pushes the water inside the cells or upward throughout the plant. I hope you have understood. अब दो चीज़ों के बारे में जान लेते हैं, which deals with the loss of water. Those are, other than transpiration obviously, those are guttation and breeding. Guttation में क्या होता है? When there is the turgidity exceeds, or when there is excess water in the leaves, it creates pressure on the walls of the leaf, and due to that, what happens? Those water oozes out from the ends of the leaf veins through an opening called hydra throats. Okay, and what happens in breeding? That when there is a cut in the stem, the turgid pressure pushes the water out of those cuts. Simple. Now let us get familiar with the upward movement of water and minerals, which occurs through xylem only. Now for that, we will discuss about few experiments. Now in experiment 1 deals with roots absorbing the water. What we have done is that taken two test tubes, one for experimental setup and one for control setup. Now, in the experimental setup, in the test tube, we have filled water and poured some oil on top of that and placed a seedling with roots intact in it. But in the control setup, everything is same other than the seedling is not present in that control setup test tube. Oil is poured over water to make sure that water is not lost through evaporation. Obviously, both the test tubes are marked for the water levels. Now, after a few hours, you will notice that the water level goes down in the experimental setup test tube where we have the plant with the roots. Whereas in the control setup, the water level stays the same since there is no plant present, which makes sure that roots does absorbs water. Okay. Now, second experiment, what we have done in that is that dipped a plant with obviously roots intact in a solution of eosin, which is pink in color. Okay. Now, after a few hours of staining, and when we take out that plant and cut a transverse section, we will see that the xylem of that eosin stained plant is also stained, while the other parts are not stained, from which we can conclude that water is obviously taken up only by the xylem and not by any other part. Now, in the third experiment is about conduction through xylem and phloem. That is xylem for water and phloem for the food. What we have done, we have taken two beakers. In one beaker, we have placed a plant where there is only xylem and no phloem, and in this one what we have done is that we have removed the xylem and the phloem is kept intact. Now what happens is that the one where the phloem is removed and xylem is kept intact, the leaves on this plant remains uptight. Why? Because obviously if the xylem is present, the water is being conducted to the leaves and hence they remain uptight. While here we can see where the xylem is removed, the leaves have wilted. Why? Because there is no xylem, and if there is no xylem, it makes sure that there is no conduction of water. Now, another interesting thing is that here you can see the upper part here is a bit swollen. Now why? It is because that we know that leaves produce the food or the synthesis of glucose. Now the upper part where the food is already produced, they are easily receiving the food and hence they are uptight. But since the phloem is removed here, the food cannot move downwards. Since the food cannot move downwards, the lower portion of this plant will dry out within a few days, since plants can also not survive without the food, and food is transported by phloem. So from here we can conclude that xylem conducts water and phloem conducts the food. सब लोग समझ गए होंगे ये concept. Now let us move on to the ascent of sap. Now what is ascent of sap? Ascent of sap is nothing but the simple upward movement of water and minerals, which is ultimately the sap, is known as the ascent of sap. Now what forces are involved in this ascent of sap? First being root pressure. So the root pressure continuously pushes the cell sap inside the cell and also upward through the plant xylems. Okay. Now comes capillarity. Now what is capillarity? Capillarity is nothing is that the xylem vessels are built very thin in order to create a vacuum situation when there is a loss of water through transpiration. Now due to the thin vessels like capillaries, the water is easily pulled upwards. This phenomenon is known as capillarity. Next comes the transpiration pull. Now what is transpiration pull? Now it also interconnected with the capillarity. Now due to transpiration there is a loss of water which ultimately creates a vacuum inside the vessels. Now in order to fill up that vacuum, the water rushes upward, and that is why it is known as the transpiration pull. Now due to the cohesion, which is the attraction of water molecules with each other, also takes part in this transpiration pull. Got it? Last but not the least, there comes the adhesion. Now what happens due to the adhesion is that the water molecules are stuck to the walls of the cell wall and the cell membrane, and due to that there is enough space left inside the xylem vessels to take up more water, right? So in that way adhesion indirectly helps in the ascent of sap. Now with this discussion of the ascent of sap, we end the chapter which is absorption by roots. I hope आप सब लोग सब कुछ समझ गए होंगे. It is not very difficult, I think. I will also attach the notes, and अगर आप thoroughly वो notes पढ़ेंगे और ये वीडियो एक बार ठीक से मन लगा के देखेंगे तो सब कुछ समझ जाएंगे. ठीक है ना? तो with that we end this video here.